You know, and we all have our 15 minutes of fame, and I'd like to take a couple of my 15 minutes to talk about the rights and the wrongs in the world of professional wrestling.
And it is for the WWE Championship.
This match is for the ECW World Heavyweight Championship.
The World Heavyweight Championship.
The match and new NWA Heavyweight Champion.
We appreciate you guys coming out and taking your time to support women's wrestling in America.
This match is for the AWA World Heavyweight Wrestling Championship.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. You are listening to the Rights and Wrongs of Pro Wrestling Podcast here, Women's Pro Wrestling Network. I'm your host, Mr. Green. Thank you so much for tuning in and taking time out to go through some of these goings-on in the world of professional wrestling, particularly as it relates to some of the young ladies out there that are participating in this grand sport. Of course, there's always some news that's happening and things that are taking place in the world, the least of which are more WWE releases. And I guess at this point, it seems like it's coming along to being just a monthly expense. If I were working for the WWE at this point and I was not somebody that was being utilized constantly, at this point, I'm sending out feelers. At this point, I am, I'm trying to get whatever connections I can get. I'm trying to see, what's the quote that I can get out on the indies. Is Impact interested? Is Ring of Honor interested? In NWA, you name it. I'm probably sending it out there just to be sure because, man, if anything, last month we found out that, nobody's really safe. But particularly if you are somebody that's there that they just haven't done anything with. If you occupy most of your time sitting and catering, it's probably a good time to be at least thinking about your options. I know that you can't go running around and actively checking into it. It might work against your contract or something to that effect, but I absolutely will look. Well, in this particular round of releases, there was only one female talent that was cut. I'm going to bring up the other ones first, and then I'll rope it back around to her. What we got here is Killian Dane, the Bollywood Boys, Sunil and Samar Singh, Arturo Reyes, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, Kurt Stallion, Fandango, and Tyler Breeze, which is actually, if I were going to say anybody was shocking in there, I actually think that the team of Fandango and Tyler Breeze might be. I thought they might have found a little bit of a resurgence in NXT and perhaps, had a little bit of a run in there, but apparently not. Everrise, which is another tag team. I don't think that's not clearly as shocking. Chase Parker and Matt Martell. Tony Nese has also been released, which, Tony came off as a very talented guy. I really expect him to land in one of these promotions, relatively quickly, or at least show his face once his 90-day non-compete comes up. Arya Davari also was let go, unfortunately, I guess, and August Gray. But the female within that is Marina Shafir, who is the wife of Roderick Strong. We really haven't seen her. And to add to that, Jessamine Duke, who was released the month prior, pretty much effectively ends whatever collaborations that the Four Horsemen of MMA might have had within the WWE. I mean, the only woman that's left at this point is Shayna Baszler. Ronda Rousey, although I believe still under contract, had made it clear to the world, not just WWE, that at this point she's interested in starting a family, and that has been her focus in the last couple of months. So we only have one that's active and one that's available. That's Shayna Baszler. She is the last of the 4 horsewomen within WWE's walls. But Shafir and Jessamine Duke, let's just go ahead and put her in that, because I don't want to say their primary goal, but they seem like their primary value in WWE at the time was NXT as a tag team. That was probably the place that they were going to be viewed the best. That's probably the place that they were going to be utilized the best. And if they had gotten into the whole tag team spiel as much as the company probably could have pushed them, then they may have done something. Unfortunately, we really didn't see them all that much as a team, especially once Baszler was gone. While Baszler was there in NXT with them, of course, they became basically her muscle and her backup. But outside of that, I mean, what did we really get out of them? So it kind of cut some of that short. I wish I could say that this was surprising. I wish I could say that any of these releases were surprising. But I don't think so. That a lot of the releases there, like I said at the beginning, they come from people who are not high on the WWE radar. They're not high in the pecking order of WWE, and the fact that she's married to one of their stars doesn't mean anything. Clearly we've already seen this happen when Miro was cut and Lana was not, and then Lana was cut, maybe the following month or something like that. No. I stand corrected, not the following month, because they had to go driving her through a table every chance they got. So, needless to say, I would believe that if Marina Shafir chose to continue, now that's going to be the real question here. Will she, and for that matter, will Jessamine Duke, will they choose to continue working as a professional wrestler? I think that there's a future with both of them in the wrestling business, especially if they decide that they want to pursue this tag team thing, because I think that's where the money is for them. The money is utilizing the 4 horsewomen name. The money is them as a package. The money is them as a tag team. And for those locations that may have a spot for tag team wrestling with the women, that might be a good look for them. It might be a good place for them to go. And the only real location that they can go utilizing that at this point is Impact Wrestling. The Impact Wrestling roster does have a female tag team championship that could be gone after, and that could be fun for them. That could be fun. And, of course, at this point, Impact does allow for its talent to go out on the indies, and of course they got to work a relationship with both New Japan and AEW. So that, I know a lot of people tend to crap on Impact Wrestling, but that could be a fun alternative. Very possible, very possible. So, but in any case, most of these, just to wrap up the releases thing for a moment. Most of these releases come from people who've been there for an excessively long time. I know we all want to feel bad and we want to, oh man, I can't believe WWE's doing this and what have you. But, let's look at this from a logical point of view. You're not going to stay at any job forever, as much as you may try. Because now, some people have been there for a long period of time, and, those are the money makers. Those are the ones that, if we drop them, we're going to lose out on significant income because they push a lot of T-shirts or a lot of revenue, a lot of merchandise, what have you. If you're not falling into that, you're subject to be cut. That's pretty much what it comes down to. You're subject to be let go at any given time. But we shouldn't. I know it's kind of, I don't want to say the thing to do to be upset with the WWE because they start letting people go, but it's going to happen eventually at some point, and this is why, if for no other reason, that you want to root for places like Impact, like Ring of Honor, like the NWA, NWA Empowerrr, what have you, to stay active. You want them to stay alive because of things like this. You know, it wasn't. Well, I mean, it's been well over 20 years now, but in my viewpoint, relatively speaking, it wasn't all that long ago that guys weren't necessarily worried about that. People leaving the company wasn't a big deal because people left all the time. They stayed there as long as they felt like it, and either the company let them go or they decided, you know what, I think I'm done here. It's time for me to move on. But now we've raised a generation of wrestlers who, once they get to WWE, have no plans on leaving whatsoever. It becomes their life. It's like, I can't go. This is it. This is my job. I'm going to retire here. And yes, there are some people that get the chance to do that. Like, let's say The Miz. The Miz is probably going to retire out of WWE. He's already become a millionaire. He's already done everything that he could possibly do in that company. He's won who knows how many championships. He's been WWE champion twice. Only title he hadn't won, I think, was the world title and the Universal. But needless to say, at this point, what else is he going to do? When he retires or if he gets cut, he's not going anywhere. He'll probably just pack up shop and like, all right, I'm done. I'm retired. But as far as the rest of these guys, you have a time frame. Your time in any company, WWE or otherwise, is finite. It comes to an end at some point in time. True, you don't want to rush it, but if you've been there over a decade, like, I don't know, Fandango or somebody like that, if you're pushing that long, you've gotten a lot out of that company, probably far more than most people expect. Speaking of people that were let go, I don't want to say against their will, but earlier than what they wanted, one other release that I guess should be brought up, even though she was not a in-ring talent, was the WWE writer. What's that? Kenice Mobley, who it's funny. Her interview, and I forget the name of the interview that she did this with, so forgive me for that. But I'm sure at this point you probably heard about it. The young lady who got onto a podcast and she was talking about that the WWE really didn't require her to know anything to get the job. Okay, so first off, we know that Kenice Mobley was a writer and she was a comedian, or is. I don't want to say that in past tense. The WWE's hiring practices. If ever there was a shining spotlight on what their hiring practices are and how they view themselves, you've just got it right there. Right there. That was the shining example of what the WWE has done. And we can't relegate that strictly to the writers, because in some cases they've done it with the wrestlers too. But we will stick with the writer here for a moment to say she got onto a podcast, a documented format, and told whoever was listening that she knew little to nothing about the WWE. That was the first thing. Secondly, she vaguely knew who the champion was, their primary guy. I think his name is Bobby Lashley or something, which is pretty much what she said. And that he's part of the Hurt Business and they wear suits and they're like, we're cool. That is probably as vague as you could be in a wrestling context. And listen, to get hired at any given job does not require you to know the job inside and out. So I don't want to put that pressure on her. I don't want to come down on like, well, you should have known about wrestling history. You should know about Mid-South and this, that, and the other, Rock and Roll Express and Hacksaw Jim Duggan. And, no, she doesn't. She does not have to know those things. I know a lot of people would like her to know those things, but let's be honest, that is not a requirement. You can learn it. You can get in there and you can do your job and you can learn as you go. That is a possibility. I know some people don't agree with that, but hey, every job, you get a job right now, it's like there's a good possibility, unless you went to school for it, that you probably don't know it inside and out. And even if you did go to school for it, you probably don't know it inside and out, not at least in terms of what that specific job entails. But getting on her, we know that the only reason that the WWE hired Kenice is because they have a hard-on for people who have some sort of writing experience in what we quote-unquote call the real world. I wrote for Late Night with Jimmy Fallon or The Tonight Show or whatever she happens to be on or she happened to write for. She wrote for some TV shows, and thereby it was like, oh, okay, well, and she was a comedy writer, which we hear that get tossed around a lot, like, oh, the WWE hires all these comedy writers, and in a lot of cases, I don't want to say we don't take it seriously, but it sounds like the tag that gets thrown onto the WWE. But in this case, it's absolutely fact. They hired a comedy writer. They hired a comedy writer to come in and write for their show because they wanted to have somebody who had real world experience to write dialogue for these wrestlers. Because they don't view themselves as a wrestling company. The WWE does not view themselves as, oh, we're like the rest of these guys. They view themselves a cut above. They view themselves like Saturday Night Live or Modern Family or whoever else, because I can't think of any of the current TV show right now. They view themselves along those lines, which is ridiculous. But still, they have such a almost a hatred for being associated with pro wrestling. It's like they have to do everything in their power to work against being pro wrestling, including doing this. Having somebody come up with their own promo or their own speech or whatever seems like a no-no. Now, this young lady getting on any platform and saying that she knew nothing about WWE was one thing. Her, in the course of this interview, essentially saying that she did it for the money. I mean, those were not her words, but the statement was basically as such, where she said a friend of hers asked, more or less, do you feel like this company is beneath you? I mean, that's not it verbatim. You can find the quote. Let me just go ahead and say that. It's not in front of me. But and she more or less was asked that is this beneath you? I mean, kind of as a writer and whatnot. And she didn't say no. Or she didn't say yes, it's beneath me. And she didn't say no, it's not. I love the company, what have you. The answer was, they're paying me 3 times what I make at my current job, so yeah, I'm going to do that. So that kind of puts you in a bad spot, I would think, right there. But it no longer is a relevant point because she was released, and the WWE claims, and I say they claim, that decision had nothing to do with her being on this podcast and her statements on said podcast. That had nothing to do with her getting released. That is, that's what they say. And of course they're going to say that. I mean, look, the WWE is going to try to spin the public web and make sure that they are as clear of controversy as they possibly can. And we certainly are not going to allow the world to think that we were fickle or vengeful and fired this woman because she said something that we didn't like. So, yes, in a public forum, I absolutely expect them to say, no, we didn't fire her for that. There was other things. We just didn't have anything for her at this time. You have to do the corporate speak. And that's exactly what they did. They got the corporate speak. And, I will say before moving on is that it was reported that she had gotten a lot of heat before she was let go because of those statements. And who could expect it not to? And and by the way, the podcast that this was on was the Asian Not Asian podcast, which is new for me. I've not heard of that, but hey, maybe I'll have to look it up. I'm sure that this alone has gotten that podcast probably 1,000 hits, just thousands of hits just based on the controversy alone. So Anyway, Miss Mobley, I'm sure she knew that those words were probably not the correct words to start talking about in that forum, but that is no longer a moot point. I mean, it's no longer a point. The point is moot. That's old Saturday Night Live bit. So she will move on, and I'm sure she will find another gig, and much luck to her on her next writing extravaganza or next writing excursion. Speaking of podcasts, Chelsea Green, the former Laurel Van Ness from Impact Wrestling, had a statement on her podcast as well, not relative to releases, of course. This is her talking. Her podcast is called Green with Envy, for those who want to know. And she was talking about specifically the upcoming NWA Empowerrr pay-per-view, which is going to be taking place in August 28th in St. Louis. So that's going to be something interesting to watch out for. Keep your eyes open to see. I'm interested to see it, and I probably will order that and maybe do a review. But the reason I bring up her podcast and her statement, because I want to read to you a quote from her podcast. Again, the podcast is Green with Envy, and it is her talking about the NWA pay-per-view, the all-women pay-per-view, because I disagree with this, but we'll talk about that in a second. WWE must be fucking shaking in their boots right now because Mickie James is going for gold. She was hired on by NWA to be an executive producer for the first ever all-women's NWA pay-per-view. I am so excited. Mickie is amazing. Clearly, she has pushed for this for years and has been overlooked. So I am happy that she's headed to NWA. She's going to be with her husband, be with her family, and she gets to start this amazing all-women's pay-per-view. I feel like, I just can't be a pay-per-view, right? Or it just can't be a pay-per-view, right? They've got to do an all-women's show. They must, if they're going to hire Mickie James on. She's such an icon for all of the women. Not just women, but all the women in professional wrestling. She's the epitome of talent, character, wrestling ability, promo skill, everything, which is why, obviously, I absolutely love her. I definitely based the hot mess off of shades of Mickie James versus Trish Stratus. So I love Mickie. I'm so excited for this pay-per-view. That pay-per-view is, again, it's an NWA pay-per-view. It's called Empowerrr, which I love, and it's going to be live August 28th in the Chase Ballroom, St. Louis, Missouri. Anyway, so there's another portion of that, and I just want to stop for a second and address the first line in that quote. WWE, and I was reading it as it was in front of me, so I apologize, and I probably need to bleep it out. But anyway, that the WWE, by any stretch of the imagination, is shaking in their boots because Mickie is producing an all-women's pay-per-view. No. I like Chelsea Green. I think that she's an amazing talent and personality. I absolutely feel like the WWE lost out and misused that, but part of that is not their fault. She did get hurt like back to back, so they really couldn't get the chance to use her the way that they probably could have. And yes, we do know the story. Mickie James made it very public that she went to the WWE a couple of occasions and she was turned down to on the suggestion of an all-women's show of some description. But the idea that the WWE, by any stretch of the imagination, is shaking in their boots, as she put it, because that idea was taken someplace else, no. There are many wrestling promotions across the country, national platforms and otherwise, that do all-women's events, pay-per-views, streaming events, and whatnot regularly. The WWE doesn't care. They never have before, and they do not now. The only reason that they did the one that they did is because they had Ronda Rousey available to them to help sell it. And you knew she was going to be in the main event, and that's what she got. And yes, the pay-per-view is fine, and I think I talked about this on the last podcast I did. Them having that pay-per-view, how do you even tell what's success? I mean, I'm sure they got the analytics off of their network because it was still available in the U.S. at the time. But it wasn't a pay-per-view proper. It wasn't like back in the day, 20 plus years ago, when it was all determined on how much money they earned. At this point, it didn't matter. It was like they could do whatever they feel like. And if they wanted to have an all-women's pay-per-view, which or all-women's event, they could do that at any given time. They could have done it at the NXT arena or Full Sail or whatever. It didn't have to be some major thing. If they just wanted content for the network or content for WWE television, they could at any point they could do that. I mean, the Mae Young Classic is a prime example of that. They did it in a location where it was probably, other than talent fees, it was going to be a minimal amount of expense for them to pull that off. So, I mean, the idea that they somehow like, oh, damn it, we lost, Mickie James, and she's doing it, holy crap, she's going to do it someplace else is absurd. Impact Wrestling did an all-female pay-per-view probably 5 to 6 years before WWE even came close to coming around to that. Mickie James was on that one too, by the way. Which is funny. She was on the first all-female pay-per-view for Impact. She was on the first all-female pay-per-view for WWE. So, there's something to be said. But the WWE was on a mission that year. I mean, just go back and look at it. The events speak for themselves. They were just going through this whole thing of, we got our first women's Royal Rumble. We got our first women's Money in the Bank. We got our first women's Hell in a Cell. We got our first women's WrestleMania main event. We got our first women's all-female pay-per-view. They were just on a mission to do and get as much publicity off of that as they could, and they did it. They did it, and now it's been shuffled off to the back burner. It's not important anymore. Now, yes, true, they can't go all the way back to what they did with Divas. I'm sure some of the people in the company would make that happen if they could. I have absolutely no doubt about that. If they could relegate the women back down to a 30-second match, they absolutely would do it. But they can't. They can't force it back into that now because, the precedent has already been set, and they're not going to. But at the same time, I don't think that they view this as important enough to push it for, hey, we got to make this a big deal. We got to do another one and another one and another one. So Mickie James going to executive produce Empowerrr is a phenomenal thing. And again, I more than likely will order it, and then I will watch and give my thoughts and review on it. I'm looking forward to it. But I do not believe that by any value that WWE cares. They will move on and they will do their shows like normal. So anyway, the other portion of her quote is addressing her being Chelsea, being in the main event. She says, I'm excited for Mickie. I'm excited to see what comes of this. I mean, is she going to be wrestling as well? That would be epic. Or is she just going to be the producer? I mean, either way, guys, tweet NWA, tweet Mickie James, let her know I want to be on the goddamn show. Okay? I want to be the motherfucking main event of Empowerrr because that's what I deserve. Damn it, Mickie. If you're listening to this, I want to be on that pay-per-view. I want to be the main event. I can't fault her for that. I cannot fault Chelsea for wanting the main event. I can't fault her for wanting to be on the show. In fact, I would say she deserves to be on that show. She probably, like a lot of other releasees, if that's a word, are probably looking to prove themselves, probably wanting to show, like, look, they let me go, but I got value here, and this is it, and here's what I can do. So I would love to see Chelsea on the show. She's a very talented woman. even with the Laurel Van Ness, the hot mess that she produced on Impact Wrestling, I thought she took that and ran with it. I don't know if I was overly enthused with the portion of it where she was just a drunk every week. I mean, it was entertaining to some degree, but it just couldn't last forever for me. I was like, that could only go so long. And I don't think that she ever really got the match that she was looking for in that company. Like, when you get some of these ladies in there, they get a match that they can kind of hang their hat on as a professional. They get the match that they can say, if you want to see what I do and how I do it the best, look at that one. I don't know if she's had that match yet. The closest I would say is Chelsea Green versus Rachel Ellering. I think that was a pretty good one, and that one took place at one of the knockout knockdowns. So the only thing that I could disagree with, I don't know if she deserves the main event necessarily, because I don't know who else is on the show. That is going to determine a lot. That alone will determine, if Chelsea should be in the main event. I mean, she hadn't even made an appearance in a NWA show yet, so her being in the main event is kind of a stretch. Not to say that it's impossible or anything like that, because as far as I know, Empowerrr could be a standalone event. It might not need any storyline, might not need any lead up. It might not require anything like that. They may just be doing this strictly as an all women's event, no story needed, which I doubt. But time will tell. But my opinion on that is that the main event, whether it has Chelsea in it, should be determined by who else is available. And in fact, now that I'm thinking about it, she probably doesn't need to be in the main. Maybe semi. Because for her to be the main event would mean that she gets an instant title shot. The NWA Women's Champion should be in the main event. That's the person that deserves it. And that's Camille. As I am recording this right now, she hasn't lost the title yet. But yeah, she's the person that deserves to be in the main event. And I don't know if I see Camille versus Chelsea Green. I mean, I guess that's a matter of whether she's the heel or babyface walking into the event. But no, the more I sit and I think about it, the more I'm like, no, that's probably not the spot for you. Unless with now, between now and August 28th, that's about 2 months' time. If between now and then they start to get her on their programming and angling for her to get a championship match, if that is what takes place, then yes. I mean, I can't say that she cannot be in the main event, but as we're talking right now, she probably does not need to be in the main event unless she is going to be positioned as such to where she should get there. I mean, there's a lot of women out there that should be on that show. There's a lot of talent on the independent circuit who would do great, I think, there as part of the wrestling broadcast, or the pay-per-view, I should say. And time will tell when they start dropping names, because I know some of those ladies, and I said this definitely last time, some of those ladies that were on the original show or shows of the NWA before the pandemic hit, their contracts are basically expired. So they moved on. They started doing other things. They thanked the NWA for their time, and then they've just kind of taken a step out. Now, that's not to say that they won't show up. That's not to say that they won't pop back in or take an agreement and do another match like Allison Kay and Marty Bell. That's not to say that they wouldn't do that. And certainly Marlena, she's come back. So it is not an impossibility. But, the talent available is going to dictate a lot. That's ultimately what it comes down to. But if she gets that main event, that would be great. Leave your comments about whether you think that she deserves the main event herself or not, or who do you think deserves the main event? Somebody that will, that probably will be sought after for that event would be Ruby Soho, the former Ruby Riott from WWE and the former Heidi Lovelace. Now, some people are not aware that she has decided, since her release, she has decided not to go back to being Heidi Lovelace. She's already changed her Instagram name to Real Ruby Soho. So, and I guess I'm pronouncing that right, unless she has some other pronunciation for it. But she says she has no plans on bringing back the Heidi Lovelace name, largely because it was not a name that she came up with on her own. That was something that was assigned to her. Let's see if I have that quote. Well, she said she would like to keep the name Ruby if possible. During the podcast, she said, "I feel like it fits me. Ruby came from Ruby Soho, so I hold that very dear to my heart." But yeah, the reason that she is not returning to Lovelace is because Lovelace was not something that she came up with on her own. It was just something that was more or less given to her by her trainers, and she just kind of stuck with it. Which, I shouldn't say oddly enough, it happens quite frequently, honestly, on the independent circuit. I've seen that happen a couple of times. Well, we have some people who they get into the wrestling business, they train, they come up with their own name, and then the trainer's like, "No, use this. It fits you better." And they use that and they get the name over, but it's nothing that they were ever in love with to begin with. So at their first convenience, they change it. The example I use for that is the Woad. And some of you listening to this should know. If you haven't, you can always go in on my channel, Women's Pro Wrestling Network on YouTube, or you can go onto our website. But the Woad went through several name changes, some of which were not because she liked the name. She just took it because that's what she was somewhat assigned. She may not even like me bringing it up at this point because I know she's kind of buried those past names. But in the past, her first incarnation was Aisha Sunshine, and she never really had the inclination for who that person was, and that transitioned over to being Dementia the Rose. And then she went to a seminar, and somebody said you shouldn't be demented, and you the good-looking woman, you the Double D Rose. They was trying to pitch something a little bit more alluring or sexy or what have you. And then during her phase as being Double D Rose, she went from being the nickname the Woad, weapon of ass destruction, to just being her name. She just dropped Double D Rose altogether and just went with being the Woad. So, I mean, and I say all of that to say is that the path of these things are very clear. It happens a lot of times, So if you're indie wrestler out there and you have had these things, don't worry. You can always get out of it. You can always change it. Sometimes change is good. Go back and listen to the Aja Pereira interview. She talked about that in hers. Now that I think about it, it's on the Introducing Aja Pereira episode on the YouTube channel. She talks about the whole reason that she got the name Pereira is because the trainer said that she needed something because she looked exotic. So you'd be Aja Pereira from Brazil or something along those lines. So so those things happen. You get the name and then you get the where you're from and all that stuff, and it starts building out from that. And at some point, you begin to change. You decide to make your own decisions, and you become who you want to become. And in this case, I'm sure Ruby has decided that since she's coming off a national platform, having used the Ruby name, a transition to Ruby Soho is probably as easy as it can be at this point. As good a time as any to change the name and get something that she likes. Finally, the Bella Twins have come up in the news over something that they had done and said some years ago, that being on the Joan Rivers' talk show, The Fashion Police, which aired on E! In this particular interview, aired in 2013. It is the Bella Twins, and they're mocking China, who we know, Joni Laura. It's always hard for me to pronounce her name. But Joni, who had been China on WWE television and what have you, she was the subject of whatever segment, ridicule, questionnaire that they brought up. This is where the Bella Twins, or I guess Nikki in particular, more or less insulted her and said that she looked like a man. Okay, so let's start with this. First thing, the host of that show is not absolved from these statements. I don't know. I know that it's easier to put the blame entirely on the Bella Twins because the Bella Twins are still here, and Joan Rivers is not. Joan Rivers has passed away. But Joan Rivers did what Joan Rivers normally did at that point. She was insulting China because she was a comedian, and that she decided that it would be funny to bring this up and show a picture, and she looks like a man and this, that, and the other. So it wasn't just Nikki. I want to make sure that I clarify that, because they kind of presented it as if the Bella Twins were solely responsible for this insult that they had on China, while they were on the show. And, like I said, it's unfair to put that on them and them in particular. And of course, you can't make a dead person apologize. So she kind of escapes that. But it wasn't just them. And yes, she has put out a statement mocking China's appearance since that time, and because this happens all the time now. It's a resurfaced clip. How many times have we heard that? Something came up and and then they start going back over things that you did and said 10, 15, 20 years ago, whatever the case may be. But Joan Rivers made the statement in the show. Like, I totally agree, her vagina has a penis. That was her words. That's Joan Rivers' words. So she's not any different than what happened there. If anything, her daughter should get on social media like, hey, look, we probably shouldn't have said that or something like that. Joan Rivers was just as guilty as insulting her as anybody else. And more so than that. And I'm not saying this as a way to excuse the Bella Twins, because she apologized. She needed to apologize. It was fair for her to apologize. But also have to take into account that the WWE created that monster. The WWE created the monster of it's okay to insult China. They insulted China as looking like a man from day one. From the moment that she showed up on WWE television, there was always the innuendo. There was always the subtle jabs. There was always these sly remarks that aimed at her being masculine. Whether that was justified, agreed upon, or not, that's what the WWE did. You could go back and listen to practically any commentary that took place that Jerry Lawler was on or something like that, and while China's on screen, and you'll hear it. The Slammy Awards that they did, I forget which year it was. I'm going to say it's got to be 96, or somewhere relative to that, where Todd Pettengill does the opening song, and he's talking about when China and Hunter get silly, who has the willy, all of that. Those insults are not something that was centered or an exception from Nikki Bella. She came out of an environment where they did that all the time. Now, yes, they did get to a point where they started to soften China up when she went through her plastic surgery. She changed her look. She got enhancements and this, that, and the other. She went through a lot to try to get the world to love her. And I think we can all agree with that, having seen the Dark Side of the Ring episode with her on. She had esteem issues. She had self-esteem issues, and it was clear she had self-esteem issues. And having the love of your life leave you for another woman does not help those self-esteem issues. So in 2013, when this clip took place, she was excommunicated from WWE. She was gone. She was no longer part of the, quote, family of the WWE. She was not part of the WWE universe. In fact, the WWE barely acknowledged her being China. So to have the Bella Twins on there with somebody that they do not talk about, that they don't address, that up until she died, they didn't have any intentions of her ever being in the Hall of Fame, whether that was singularly or with DX or otherwise. I'm sure in Nikki's mind, she thought it was perfectly fine. It wasn't, but I'm sure she thought it was. Her employers talked about her. Why couldn't she? Was not a good decision, wasn't a good choice, didn't age well. All of the above are true. But when you have your job that goes out of their way to ridicule people on their television, and China is not an exception to that, because Vince McMahon thinks everybody is fair game and everybody's personal problems are fair game. You can go down the line. Jim Ross and his colonoscopy, China looking masculine, the fat jokes for Mickey James, who didn't even remotely look fat. And by the way, Piper Niven is probably next in line for that, with that stupid name Dewdrop that they just gave her. The WWE has no problems doing things to entertain that audience of one, because he thinks it's funny. And when you have your boss, or the entity that your boss, that represents your boss, the WWE, feel like this is perfectly fine, it becomes perfectly fine, because you exist in this bubble. You exist in this little wrestling bubble that the outside, you don't even know how to function in the outside world. Now, if they were thinking, because I don't think Brie, I think she just laughed at the clip or laughed at the statement. She didn't say anything. She just kind of had a little awkward laugh. But when things like that happen and somebody's like, hey, look at that, doesn't she look like a man? It's probably not a good idea for you to go agreeing with that on national TV. Like, if anything, she should have maybe backed off away from the statements. Like, I worked with her, or she put in a lot of time, whatever, something. Have some nice comment, just move on. But that was the nature of the show. Nikki got roped into it. She fell into doing what Joan Rivers was doing, because he was Joan Rivers, and that was her stick. It's the fashion police. We're here to talk about people and how badly they look, and sometimes how good they look. But that was the whole deal. And I'm sure Nikki regrets it. If for no other reason that she got called out on it, she regrets that. But there you have it, man. I don't want to put it all on her, is ultimately what I'm getting at with this. I don't want to put that entire thing in her lap like the rest of the media did, because it was not all her. It was the people on that show. It was Joan Rivers egging it on. It was coming from a culture and a company that completely embraced that and did everything they could up until a certain point, that she started to physically morph to tell the world how masculine she is, because they thought it was entertaining. And if that's the thing that they had to do, if that's what they felt like they, wanted to do, and then China agreed, like, hey, it's no problem, whatever, then that's fine. That's part of the program. But like I said, the wrestling bubble that they exist in, that it's hard for some of them to turn that off. It's hard for some of them to adjust when they go into some other environment. Now, they're probably fine these days, Nikki and Brie Bella, they're probably fine these days because they're so far removed from it. They're so far removed from being in the culture of WWE, day in and day out. But back then, it didn't shock me at all to see this clip pop up. Did not shock me at all. Doesn't shock me in the least that they would say something. Doesn't shock me that Joan Rivers would even bring it up. Because I'm sure just as much as WWE found it funny, she probably found it funny too. And she probably legitimately looked at it like, oh my God, she looks like a man. So, it's unfortunate. It's saddening, especially considering how China passed away probably about 3 years after this clip. She had a hard time, and even outside of them in I'll say a worked environment, because at least when she was being called that or masculine in WWE, you could make a claim that it was a worked environment. But now, she's getting it just to be getting it. And that's sad, because I'm sure if she ever saw that, it probably made her feel all the worse. It probably made her feel all the more like, this is why he left. I wasn't good enough. I didn't look pretty enough. I didn't have, and she went through everything to try to change her look. Jaw restructure, breast enhancements, physically toned her body down from less muscle mass to a more lean look. She went through a lot to try to do that. But we won't dwell on that for forever. Needless to say, I do believe Nikki when she issued her statement, and I think that it should be taken for what it is, and people probably should not give her a hard time over it, because I know some fans out there will never let anything go, and they look for any little thing to just carry on and on and on about. But her statement that she issued, over Twitter was this: I want to sincerely apologize for a comment I made over 8 years ago on Fashion Police. I am sorry and embarrassed for my 29-year-old self who offended China and in turn hurt her family and others. I wish I could take it back. Please learn from me. It's not worth hurting someone's feelings for a meaningless laugh. China will always be remembered as an icon and a pioneer who helped create the opportunities for women in wrestling that exist today. That was her statement as related to the video coming back up. And like I said, I'm sure that some of that is because she got called out on it, but also in large part, I believe her that she regrets it for multiple reasons, and one of which probably is being, you're right, you do change over the years. You cannot, 29-year-old you is probably a little different than 37-year-old you, because she is 37 now. So I'm sure that was a little bit different for her then opposed to now. So we will leave it at that. I want to thank you guys for tuning in to this podcast. I had to make sure that I got these things in as I saw them. Of course, sorry to hear about more releases, but those things happen, and I'm sure they will all take place and land on they'll be fine, I should say, and they'll land on their feet. If more wrestling news is sure to drop as the weeks go on. I am looking forward to the NWA Empowerrr event, and hopefully getting a chance to sit down and talk to some of you guys about that. If anybody else out there is looking to watch that show, drop me a line, man, or leave a comment, and let me know who do you think should be there. I mean, you could do a little bit of fantasy matchmaking. What names do you feel should be a part of the NWA's NWA Empowerrr pay-per-view? That should Mickie James be on the show? She hasn't given any indication that she's actually going to participate as a wrestler. She's only made it sound like she's going to do the executive producer stuff, and that she may not wrestle on it at all. But I honestly think that that's a little bit of a mistake. If this is the last hurrah for Mickie James, I'll say this and I'll close it up. I think that she should participate. She didn't have to participate in the main event, but I do think she should participate in some regard. In some area of that show, she should be on it as a wrestler. Like I said, she's already done 2. Pulling the turkey, and like they say in bowling, that ain't bad. She did it once for the first time for Impact Wrestling, then TNA. She did it again for the first time for WWE. So why not do it again for the first time with the NWA? That'll be a hat trick that no one else could probably follow. She has a legitimate claim on being the greatest women's wrestler of her generation. She is very, 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 very close, if not right up in there. Speaking of that, I wonder if she'll ever decide to go after the NWA Women's Championship. That could be something too. Something to think about, folks. Something to think about. So with that, I take a small bow, and I tip my hat to you to say that this is the end, and that this is Mr. Green saying so long, and I will see you on the next go round. So long, folks.
Thank you for listening to the WPN's Rights and Wrongs of Pro Wrestling. If you have questions or comments, please contact us via our Facebook or our YouTube channel at the Women's Pro Wrestling Network. If you're new to the WPN, feel free to subscribe to our channel and like our page. We appreciate your support. Thank you again for listening.